The role of middle powers has been highlighted over the course of the pandemic, as multilateral cooperation is sorely needed for the world to build back better together. In doing so, countries like South Korea, Australia and India have been regarded as examples of free and open societies that can help restore a democratic world order. To hear about the challenges and opportunities for middle powers in global governance, we welcome back the former Prime Minister of Australia, Mr. Malcolm Turnbull. As the country's 29th Prime Minister from 2015 to 2018, Mr. Turnbull was at the forefront of promoting democratic values and regional security, openness in trade, clean energy, as well as human rights and resilience to natural disasters across the world. Mr. Turnbull, it's wonderful to see you again. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you. It's good to be with you.
And well, since we last spoke earlier this year, there have been joint efforts by the world's democracies to really contain the rising threat and aggression coming from the Chinese government. That's obviously made a lot of headlines these days. And well, recently the Chinese Communist Party celebrated its centenary, where President Xi Jinping warned that foreign powers will have their heads cracked and bleeding if they attempt to bully China. So, well, I was wondering whether President Xi was actually this aggressive when you met him, and what you think about the Chinese government and what you perceive as his strategy towards this kind of pressure.
Well, all of my discussions with President Xi were perfectly friendly and warm and constructive. He, you know, at a personal level, he certainly didn't talk about cracking heads or anything like that. Look, I just say that the issue with China at the moment is that it is pursuing a foreign policy which is, I believe, quite counterproductive. I mean, if its objective is to increase its influence in the world, this sort of wolf warrior diplomacy, this belligerence, threats. I mean, you in Korea have suffered from consumer boycotts and bullying over your policies. We're going through the same period here in Australia. I mean, all of this bullying just makes people anxious. It erodes trust. It's absolutely adverse to China's long-term interests. So, you know, hopefully at some point they'll realise that what they're doing is counterproductive and take a different route.
Well, as you said, there's a high level of distrust and a lot of tension. And well, the question is what the right way of confronting and competing with Beijing is, and at the same time trying to cooperate on common challenges. Do you think this kind of balance is even possible?
Yeah, look, I think it is. I think that what we need to do is establish boundaries of trust. You know, the reality is in all of our relationships, personal, commercial, political, you know, we trust some people more than others. You know, there are things you would tell your wife or your husband that you wouldn't tell anyone else, for example. And so, as with China, in the current environment, you know, recognizing the realities of where we are, we should be able to identify the many areas for commercial, ecological, technological cooperation that do not impinge on national security and where we can collaborate. You know, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. So, you know, for example, the world has a pressing, urgent need to work together collectively to address global warming. Well, there's no reason why we can't have the closest cooperation with China on that. And indeed, you know, there is, in effect, technological cooperation. The technology that underpins the photovoltaic modules in most solar panels today was originally developed here in Australia at the University of New South Wales. This is the PERC technology. So, you know, there are many, and there are so many other examples. And I mean, South Korea is just an absolute leader in tech. So, I mean, I think we can do a lot together, even though there are some areas, those that touch on national security, where we are not going to be so prepared to work in a trusting manner.
Well, Chinese influence has been growing around the world as the country rolls out its Belt and Road Initiative, offering very cheap loans, infrastructural development, and economic opportunities, which many Western democracies have actually signed up to. But when you were Prime Minister, you actually refused to join the initiative as you saw it for what it was really and worked on actually developing an alternative. So could you tell us more about that and what you hope to see from the G7's Build Back Better World initiative?
Yeah, look, I think the Belt and Road Initiative is policy-based lending and investing. Like it's a Chinese government initiative. We don't have any problem in Australia with Belt and Road projects as long as they have the right governance, as long as they're not imposing interest costs on countries that can't afford to pay for it, as long as it's not connected with corrupt practices, right? So we're happy to look at each investment on its merits. But it is important to provide an alternative. And so we had it when I was PM, we agreed with Japan and the United States that we would collaborate on providing infrastructure finance, project finance in this region. As you know, the Australian government paid for the Coral Sea cable, the Coral Cable, which provides fibre optic link between Australia, the Solomon Islands, and Papua New Guinea, thereby connecting them to the internet. And we've paid for other telecoms infrastructure in the region, and we've done so as a grant. So it's not imposing an interest cost or a debt obligation on those countries that can't afford it. You know, we've got to recognise that we owe it to the developing world to enable them to catch up, to give them the means to catch up and get the economic opportunities they're entitled to. But, there's no point lending people money that they can't afford to pay or will struggle to pay. We're better off being generous and treating these investments as grants, as part of the foreign aid budget.
Right, and that really, I believe, it really had the spirit of expanding this free and open kind of spirit across societies, and hopefully that's what we'll also see from the G7's Build Back Better World plan. But then, in addition to geopolitical threats to democracies, we've seen some threats to democracy closer to home and actually on our smartphones. Over the course of the pandemic, we've of course seen the power of big tech companies expanding exponentially. And while social media platforms have been helpful in some certain respects, they've also failed to stop disinformation from spreading online. And we saw Facebook in Australia actually turning off the stream of news media across its platform during a spat with the local authorities. So do you think big tech companies are perhaps becoming a threat to democracy, and should more be done to regulate them?
Well, I think the answer is yes and no, regrettably. The social media platforms provide an opportunity for people to communicate at a level, in a manner they've never been able to do before. But there is a risk, and the risk is that people get into silos. So they get into sort of environments where the only news and information they're seeing is that which reinforces their opinions and or prejudices, very often prejudices. And so, we used to live in a world of mainstream curated media where the media platforms had an incentive to reach as many people as possible. That's why they were called mass media. And so invariably they sought to be reasonably balanced because they didn't want to offend people. If they were too far to the right, the people who were on the left wouldn't watch, and so forth. Now you've got this situation where not just in social media, but in cable television, for example. Look at Fox News in the United States. You've got narrow casting mainstream media and social media propagating lies. I mean, the real problem we've got is a lack of truth. I mean, look at all the anti-vaccination propaganda that is being poured out in the United States, which is slowing down the vaccine rollout there. Look at the way in which the Republican Party in the United States seems to have, and its media friends like Mr. Murdoch's Fox News, are now of the view that Joe Biden did not win the election. So, imagine how corrosive and damaging that is to a democracy where you have media, both social and mainstream, which is actually undermining confidence in the legitimate constitutional democratic institutions of the country, and doing so based on a falsehood. So I think what we need to really be doing is standing up for truth. And I don't mean opinions. I mean, people are entitled to have whatever opinion they like. But, as Keynes said, you're entitled to your own opinions, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And what we're seeing now is a sort of a legitimization, or perhaps a better word, a normalization of lying. And I think that has happened very rapidly in the last 4 or 5 years. And it is particularly, led by Donald Trump, of course. And that is a real threat, a real internal threat to democracy.
And as you said, I think, well, these falsehoods, these lies, they've really incited more populism within borders and added to dividing them, this divisiveness within societies. And well, do you think these domestic forces of populism will also continue challenging efforts for multilateral coordination on common global challenges like, as you said, the vaccination efforts and also climate change?
Well, they certainly do. I mean, the sort of populist anti-climate action agenda in the United States, which Donald Trump channeled, saw America withdraw from the Paris Treaty. And we need every country in the world to act on global warming, and we certainly need the United States and China, the two biggest economies in the world. So without them, with them we can do pretty much anything. Without them, we can't do anything at all. So these domestic, sort of non-reality based agendas, if that's a bit of jargon, but essentially just another word for lying, these agendas are hugely damaging, both domestically and internationally. I mean, saying you believe or disbelieve in global warming is about as intelligent as saying you believe or disbelieve in gravity. It's a physical fact. And, politicians and commentators can obfuscate and talk and debate and as long as they like, but the physics is inexorable. And, we're seeing this now. The greenhouse gases in the atmosphere continue to increase, and the impact on our climate continues with all of the outcomes we're seeing at the moment, with more floods, fires, heat waves, and other things besides. So, that's really what we're suffering from at the moment, I think, in Western democracies is a truth deficit, and it's the normalization of lying, and I think that there needs to be an accountability taken or required of both social media platforms and mainstream media platforms that are propagating falsehoods.
Well, it's been quite clear that Mr. Joe Biden in the United States has really tried to restore America's leadership in global governance, but there have been some questions and doubts as to what extent that America is truly back. And well, South Korea and Australia, they both participated in the extended G7 leaders session, and they were representing, of course, free and open societies. And the two countries have also been collaborating with each other through consultative groups such as MICTA, composed of Mexico, Indonesia, South Korea, Turkey and Australia. What kind of role do you see for middle powers like Australia and South Korea in building back this democratic world order, especially when the leadership of traditional democratic powers have been in question?
Well, we have to work closely together. I've always said for years that we've got to stop seeing the world as a series of spokes going into hubs in Beijing or Washington. We've got to see the world more as a mesh where all countries, particularly middle powers, can work together. Now, that's particularly so in our hemisphere. South Korea, Japan, Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, all of us should be working closely together. Now, we have demonstrated that we can do so. You'll remember a few years ago, Donald Trump pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and everybody thought that was dead. That trade deal was dead. And I didn't. I continued to pursue it. I said, why can't we just have a TPP without the Americans? And to his great credit, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was persuaded. I persuaded him here in my house in Sydney, actually, that we should stick with it. And we ended up getting it signed up. Now, I hope South Korea joins the TPP, or the CPTPP, as it's now called. But the fact that we were able to do that without America demonstrated that middle powers can make big reforms and pursue big agendas without the US, or indeed with China. Now, obviously, it's better if they're involved and on board, but we can't just sit around like supplicants, not prepared to do anything unless we have one of the superpowers taking the lead.
Well, especially as South Korea earlier this month, it transitioned to a developed economy status under the UN's Conference on Trade and Development. What prospects do you see for the country?
Well, South Korea is just one of the most innovative, energetic economies in the world. The culture of technology and innovation is an extraordinary one. And you've got so many leading companies, in tech, in communications, in engineering. Really, it's I think South Korea already does so much for the world and can do so much more. In the past, I know South Koreans have criticised themselves and said, we're not we are not prepared to fail. We're not prepared to admit that something has failed. And I think, to be honest, every culture is a bit like that. But the reality is, in this fast-paced environment of innovation, you've just got to encourage new ideas. You've got to encourage agility. You've got to be prepared to try things. And if they don't work out, say, okay, that's no one's to blame. Not everything works. Let's dump it and do something else. It's really important to maintain, have a culture of innovation that is on the front foot and not persevere with policies or approaches, whether it's in government or business, that are not successful. So, innovation is the key. It is, because really it's tech that is going to save us. I mean, you look at Korea has a big steel industry, right? And that's a big emitter of greenhouse gases. Now, one of the businesses I'm working very closely with is Andrew Forrest's Fortescue Future Industries, which is seeking to be the biggest producer of green hydrogen in the world. So that's hydrogen made with renewable energy. Now, imagine if the Korean steel industry used hydrogen instead of coal to make steel, and that's perfectly feasible. I mean, we know it can be done, but it obviously is going to require a lot of R&D and investment to optimize it. But we are working closely with Korean companies and Korean leaders. I think it is the most important thing that South Korea can do for the world is to deliver the benefits of its intellect, its creativity, its innovation, because technology is what will protect us in the future, whether it is from viruses or whether it is from global warming. And that, combined with determination and a sense of common purpose, is the answer.
And while we in Korea have always been inspired by your innovative policy action during your time as Prime Minister, and we're also very grateful for your ongoing efforts to continue promoting democratic values and really innovation development and climate action especially. And well, this is where we have to end the interview today. But that
Thank you very much.
Mr. Malcolm Turnbull, 29th Prime Minister of Australia, who served the country from 2015 and 2018. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much.
And to our viewers, as always, thank you very much for watching.